Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this second plenary session of the conference. I'm Alistair Kent. I'm the Director of Genetic Alliance UK, which is the UK alliance of over 180 patient support groups who support families who are affected by diseases which are at best intractable. Many of them, unfortunately, are still incurable. And not a few of them are fairly rapidly lethal. So in this panel, what we're going to be doing is looking at the issue from the perspective of the end user, the patient, the family, who is dependent on high-quality biomedical research being sustained and translated, importantly, into interventions, innovations that will improve the quality and quantity of life for those currently living with these dreadful diseases. We've got a very high-level panel here. We're going to go through in order. Each will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a couple of questions for clarification before launching into a conversation at the end. And I would stress that what I hope is that we will have a conversation, because the expertise is at the front of the room, sure, but it's also there in the room with you. So we want to capture your insights, your understanding, your suggestions, as well as your questions, so that we can ensure that we get the maximum added value out of this session. Collaboration is very much the flavor of the month. I mean, who would say they were against collaboration? You know, everybody thinks it's a good idea, but how can we make it real? You know, we've moved beyond now the kind of token idea of having, you know, the one patient representative who sits at the steering committee meeting, doesn't know what the hell's going on amongst people who are talking a language they don't understand. You know, we need to be able to ensure that the patient, the family input to sustainable biomedical research and development is able to be heard in such a way that we can focus on the things that matter, not just the things that can be counted. And we must invest in the ability of patients to develop their input so that we can speak to you in ways that you can hear and understand and know what it is that we want you to do with us, for us, and on our behalf. We must ask the right questions so that we can hear the answers, which means training our scientists, training our clinicians, training our regulators, as well as training our patients and our patient advocates, so that we can talk a common language and build a shared route forward and deliver those better outcomes that are so essential. And that means, amongst other things, paying attention to the social and the psychological elements of a disease, not just those physical aspects. It means supporting patients to engage in the R&D process by not only making it easy for them, but recognizing that, you know, we have families. We might have other children who are not, you know, we need to look after while we take part in your research or while we contribute to the clinical trial. It means we might have carers' responsibilities that need to be accounted for and factored in, and so on. You need also to think about how you engage with us and feed back to us what you're understanding and what you're doing and how it influences our choices, so we can keep you on the right track and make sure that you're addressing those important issues. And we need to look at the process by which the innovation that we create is implemented in clinical practice, because it's no use having the best possible drug or treatment or surgical procedure or whatever if it never makes it to the patients. So in order to explore some of these issues, we've got a very high-powered panel of speakers. The first is John Wubber, who's the Secretary General of EPOSI, which is the European Platform for Patient Organizations, Science and Industry. I'm not going to look at tell you about our speakers. You can read their biographies in your program. But we have a replacement. If you look at your program, we would have had Peter Saltonstall from NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders. But unfortunately, Peter is unwell. So we're very grateful to Marshall Summer, who has stood in at literally less than 24 hours notice. He did, when I asked how he wanted to be described, he did, what was it? A hillbilly from Tennessee, was it? So, you know, you will get the hillbilly from Tennessee's perspective here. Pat Furlong from Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and Anders Olausson, who you have heard from already in the previous session, the president of the European Patients Forum. So I'd now like to hand over to John, who will give us his 10 minutes of, without hesitation, deviation or repetition. John, thank you.
Thank you, Anders. So, okay.
Got it, John?
Yes.
There you go.
Except for that I'm half blind, but that's anything else. Well, this one is easy. That's the one that's all about. Many people talk about big data, and then everyone thinks, like said before, we need this data, and APOSI and our EDIPA, European Digital Peer Patient Alliance, were saying like, well, okay, that's very nice, but if I as a patient give a lot of data, the first thing that happens when I become a patient is that I'm no longer getting a mortgage, I'm not getting a credit card anymore, so I was actually more concerned not about protection, but about who is actually using when my data, and I wanted to see where is all my data going while I'm living around. So we did a nice research with thanks to Jon Gorens, who's now filled out there, but please tell him afterwards. So we have a personal health record where actually no one is talking about. Everyone who's talking here is actually talking about the electronic health record. That's the one that's coming out of hospitals. But actually, when we want to see the vital life sciences, the vital data we already have out of big data that comes out of hospitals, that's out of a circulate a procedure. If we want to have something like in Europe, so we have great data in the United States that's coming out of hospitals, but if we want to look into other burden of disease, things like getting old and all that kind of things, that is happening outside of the hospitals, and then we need to have much more information about what is actually coming out of the personal health record. And this personal health record is actually coming out of public Internet of Things, where all the cameras are running around. In the shops, we have all the cameras that are taking care about who and how I walk. In the Netherlands, just right now, something going on where they are asking people with Alzheimer and with other problems to get some gaining points on the internet and then go to the shop. And while they are shopping, you have some camera review, and that's actually getting from the public Internet of Things, but then it gets very personal, so you get a personal Internet of Things where the data is actually related to the people. Where is this data otherwise coming from? Of course, we have smart living, where we see how much people are drinking or peeing, like in Japan. And we have an ambient assisted living, where we actually have all these smart devices coming on the market. And of course, this beautiful Wi-Fi, how much steps I did in the fitness center. Where we have no research done at all till now. And the most important thing is, what is actually the burden of disease assessment? So what is actually most important for the patients? Because the patients don't want to have a medication, they just want to have a reduction of the burden of disease, or they want to have an enlargement of the quality of life. So what did we do? We thought, like in all these things, you need to have a kind of governance that we are looking into it. So we are working now together with the biobanks. That's a big smart thing to connect all the biobanks so that we have all this data together in Europe. And then as APOSI, we are actually bringing all the stakeholders together to make sure that everyone is getting or is actually telling what they need and what they want. The same we are doing with the electronic health record, where everyone is talking about interconnectivity, and we have their great continua telling about, oh, we are going to connect it, only they are only making the hard and software applicable to the American side of the ocean and not to the European side. So there needs to be a little bit more done for the use in Europe. Then we have the personal health Internet of Things, where we are working together with a few ongoing programs, where we actually say like, okay, and we need to have much more data available about the burden of disease. So what's happening with the people on the ground, what is actually your problem and how can we actually attach to it. We hear this one before taken care of perfectly. At the end of the day, you have very narrowed population and you cannot work with a very constrained research design. So the study design is actually getting, the more people you want to have in, the better the more you have to change your study design. If you look into the COPD and asthma, you only have 5% of the whole population in a randomized clinical trial. I know I only say the things that we already know. Beautiful quote coming from some people around before. I'm just clicking like hell because my time is limited. So, where we all talked about, and this is just how real life studies can be built, existing evidence. Yes, we have, of course, we look, is it effective? But then we have to actually look, the safety is done, but now how much of this data that we can actually get is actually getting back so that we are getting this stratified medicine? Well, the only way how you can do it is actually if you have these patients involved. Now I'm getting on a very, thing. Yes, role-derived data, intellectual property, and accessibility. It was big on the top, but I hope no one missed it. If you want to have the trust of patients to get actually all the data that is coming out of their personal life, you have to give them something back. And if we are saying we are going to collect data and who is actually going to pay for it, then we have to have a pay idea around it, how we are going to pay for it and who is actually getting what from it. So the whole value chain through all this data, through all these different stakeholders, through all these different stages to get on one side the R&D and on the other side to have the going to marketplace, who is in this value chain actually giving what into it? So we say, well, it's very nice as a patient to have the intellectual property 100%, but the moment that you want to have something from the others, well, they also did some of their work. So why not come into a multi-stakeholder round table, talk about what are the values. So for that we have, for example, rapid HTAs, as before talked about, or the health impact assessment, where we actually can decide how much is actually done by the different stakeholders in this value chain. As a policy, we are doing much faster as most HTA agencies. We're actually doing rapid HTAs with the different stakeholders. Why? As we know, we can actually, as a policy, we have a network all over and we know who to ask. We are just facilitators. We are not another patient organization or another industry organization or whatever. No, we are facilitators and say we know where everyone is. So if a regulator or the pharma industry comes in and says, well, we need something for this research or, for example, for this investment right now with the SMEs, we can help there because we know who to ask. And then you say, like, okay, what's the value? Well, there you do a rapid HTA, and that gives actually much faster steps to go forward so that you get actually reimbursement of the whole thing. I believe that's it. Done.
John.
Good.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, John. You talk about sharing IP.
Yes.
How are you going to do that? I mean, are you going to give the share of the IP to the patient organization or to the individuals who participate in the research in the form of a cashback payment or something?
Thank you that you're elongating my 10 minutes. No, we have in Europe, we are working right now on this cloud, European cloud, where actually the data of the patients are going to be collected or actually donated or whatever it's coming out. But then you have to have your governance in place. So we have, for example, EUDIPA, the European Digital Peer Patient Alliance, that's actually saying it's very nice to have all these patient organizations and umbrella organizations, but we want to have real patients on the floor helping with this. So at the moment that someone is actually not having his patients directly accessed, he's not really a patient organization, and then it's for sure not helpful to do research. So there is a patient organization, but they have to have at least 5 to 20% of the population of this burden, of this disease, and then they are taking 10% of the amount of money. And then the person that is actually giving the DNA, that is the winning lotto for this one, is also getting 10%. So it's a 12% going all the way from the end, where you actually have only 1 of 500 or 900 researchers that actually came to the market. And then that goes back through governance in this EUDIPA that takes care about it, and then you get your money for that. So that's how that works.
Thank you. Yeah.
So that was, I was thinking more in the line of that if someone wants to put their data out, that if they share it, they can do so. But you're saying, I mean, and then anyone, if they say, I take it and I put it out for anyone to use, they have the permission to do that. But you're saying that rather than encouraging people to just put their data into a repository, if they aggregate along the lines of patient communities, then the patient communities, that any products that come out of that go back to the organization and then the individuals as well?
Yes, because we have this human resource problem. Everyone is talking about solutions here, but we do not have the human resource. So we have to ask patient organizations with the right literacy and the right explanation to help other patients. That's via Patient Alliance. Okay. Where you then say, like, for your research, you need only a certain patient with a certain literacy, because not the beginning, because he's giving you all the arousals, and not the last one, because then you can go to your physician. You need a certain group that you can qualify and quantify.
One here, please. You're a bit of a blur to me, so please be extravagant in your gestures when you want the microphone.
Hi, Brian Roy from CADITH, an HTA agency in Canada. Interested, John, in this slide that you've got up here on patient involvement in the rapid HTA. We engage patients in almost everything we do, but one area we don't is in our rapid reviews. So I'm just wondering if you've got any experience in how meaningful it is, the impact of patient involvement in these rapid HTAs?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that it's for sure you have to have them in the beginning, as we have in Europe a party what is actually giving these expert patients. That's one thing. But we also need to have not only research patients, let's say in cancer and everything, but we also have a huge burden of disease like incontinence or diabetes too, where actually when you don't involve them all the way in the beginning, you just are going to ask the wrong questions. And if you have the wrong questions, then you are actually doing something what is a turn in the air. So we can actually deliver those patients because we know where to ask. And then you can actually be within 5 questions, we know what kind of quality or literacy they have. And then we say, right patients. But you have to involve them right in the beginning. Otherwise you don't think about the things that you actually are confronted to at the end. As was said before, you have to have from the beginning till the end, from R&D to all the way to getting into the market. And then you have to know what are these people actually asking. They don't ask a medicine, they ask to solve their problem in their life.
Thank you, John. We'll move on. So if you'd like to
take
your seat, and we'll. Thank you. So Marshall, let's have the Tennessee hillbillies perspective on this.
Well, being a geneticist from Tennessee, some would describe as redundant, but I am a native Tennessean. I can make the joke. If you're not, you can't. Sorry. No, my name is Marshall Summer. I'm filling in for Peter Saltonstall today. I have the pleasure of chairing the Scientific and Medical Advisory Committee at the National Organization for Rare Diseases, and also I'm the Division Chief for Genetics and Metabolism at Children's National Medical Center, just up the hill here. I also wear a couple of other hats, which kind of come into play with some of this. One of which is I've done a lot of work with the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network with NIH. I'm the PI on one of the networks there. And we've had a tremendously successful run working with the European Union with their mirror image of our rare disease clinical research networks. Why are rare diseases an important topic here today? Well, when you do any survey, what's always the most common category? What always gets the most hits? Other. Welcome to rare disease. We're the other. What's NORD? NORD's a 501c3. Think of it as sort of an omnibus organization for small rare disease groups. So what we do is we try to provide resources for what would otherwise be a whole series of small mom and pop shops with no voice of their own. So we try to bring them together so that they have a voice in policy, so that they have some organizational skills, so they have infrastructure that otherwise they could not do. So parents and family members and patients themselves who want to advocate for their disease, NORD actually is a vehicle they can use to do that. We have about over 200 member organizations. Seems like we had about 2 or 3 new ones a week, representing well over 1,000 different conditions. A couple of issues around rare disease, just everyone, one thing my wife told me, she works on the Hill, is always give them some fun facts to take home. 30% of patients with rare diseases will die before they're 5 years old. There's over 7,000, hang on 1 second. The other thing is don't bob your head too much. All right, sound check? Yeah, good. There's over 7,300 different rare conditions currently listed with NIH. If you put all of the people with rare disease into one country, it would actually be the 3rd largest country on the planet. They might have an interesting Olympic team too. Only about 400 of these conditions have some form of approved treatment. 2/3 of the patients are children. That's one of the reasons I started life as a pediatrician, and I work now obviously in genetics and rare disease. The impact on these economically is huge. If you go through any children's hospital, about 35% of the patients in a hospital bed at any one time will have a rare genetic condition of some form, but they generate over 50% of the hospital bills. So there's a large impact on healthcare from this, and of course the adult physicians are not exempt now because we're doing a better job in pediatrics at getting our patients through. So now there's a tsunami of rare disease patients who are coming into adulthood moving forward. So where do patients and NORD fit in? Well, one thing we've been working on is particularly in the FDA process. With the FDA's cooperation, they've been very helpful so far on this, but we've got a lot of ground to go, is getting patients involved in the approval process. I've been involved in about 5 medications coming through the FDA process successfully, and we always sit down as a group and kind of say, well, gee, what are the things that we want to improve with this medication? We'll come up with something like a 10-minute walk test or a change in this biomarker or that biomarker, and then after we've done all that, got the study design, we'll go talk to the families and say, well, isn't this great? And they say, no, that's completely irrelevant to what I do. Could you actually do something like, I can go get the mail, or I can stand up and reach the counter to turn on the water faucet, something like that. So one of the things we're really working with the FDA is participation in panels, but participation in the design phase as well, where you come up with relevant outcomes that are going to be meaningful for patients, sometimes much easier to measure than things that we would come up with ourselves. So the other thing is risk models. So the FDA, and obviously I would not want to be an FDA official because they're sometimes the first ones thrown under a bus when things don't go well. But the other thing is, what is acceptable risk? So if I have a condition where my child is going to die very early in life, what is the sort of risk that I'm willing to take? Or if I have a disease where I'm going to die very soon, what is the risk I'm willing to take around a new medication or around a new treatment opportunity? So in the 21st Century Cures, there's some new models being proposed. NORD's been very active in trying to move that forward. The other thing is what I call the don't know what you don't know and know what you know. So with most rare disease conditions, we'll have some data from the first few, I'm speaking as a clinician now, we'll have some information from the first series of patients that were reported. After that, it's pretty much of a vacuum. It's very hard to get publications on what happens in the day-to-day lives. So one of the things we've done at NORD is we put together patient-driven registries. This has been an FDA, NIH, NORD collaboration. We wanted the data to be acceptable for preclinical trials, which would accelerate the process of approval, but we also wanted data from the patients themselves, data about day-to-day living, the sorts of things that you just don't collect out of an electronic medical record, because those are more around hospitalizations and acute events, but the kind of data that actually will affect true quality of life. So we've rolled out 5 of these already. We have 30 on the production line and about 100 in the hopper. And this has been, I think, one of our more successful projects. How does this help out with accelerating treatments and making them more accessible? As a clinician, it informs me. It tells me, what am I not catching? What did I not know about? What is a comorbidity for a condition I was unaware of? From the standpoint of developing new treatments, it means that if I am trying to change a clinical outcome, I now know how common it is. What's the impact of that on the patients? I then have the data I need to go and say, okay, I'm going to try this treatment out, and then I can actually measure how effective it is for these patients. And my ears, it must be that Tennessee thing with the ears, I don't know. All right, let's try that back. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, great. I'm told my voice carries. Other things that we're doing are rare disease accelerators. We're working on reforming informed consent. Recent evidence, we had a study that needed 40 centers to collect 20 patients. That's the reality of rare diseases. It took 2 years to get the informed consent documents through all 40 institutions. It took 6 months to do the study. So one of the things we're working towards is how do we make that process more rational without being overly burdensome from a regulatory standpoint. Rare disease study coordinator. So let's say you want to come in and try a therapy out in a disease where there's only 5 patients. How do you find them? One of the things NOR does is we act as a connector between patients with rare diseases and folks interested in studying those. So we do a lot of matchmaking. We do matchmaking with organizations, with patients, researchers, and industry. So we have summits periodically. We'll have collections where patient organizations come, where industry comes, where investigators come. And it's kind of fun to watch those because there's the talks and everyone listens to the talks. Well, not everyone listens to the talks, but the hallways. There's so much done in the hallways at these meetings, at these summits, where people are making these connections. I almost think sometimes we should just have one of these, put everybody in a giant hallway, and then cancel the talk, because I think we'd probably get more done sometimes. Informatics is another field. We do a lot with patient and practitioner guidelines. It's hard to find treatment guidelines for a lot of the rare disease community, and we try to make these an organic process. So it's not a static document, it's something that evolves. One of the biggest challenges we have is what constitutes evidence for a rare disease. So most evidence in common medicine is from huge meta-analysis studies or large single-site studies. If you have 5 to 10 patients, what constitutes good evidence for that? So we're trying to work with standards, different ways of coming up. This is the best we have, basically, for a lot of the different conditions we deal with. And then we do a lot of training for patient and parent organizations. So how do they advocate for themselves? How do they build an effective organization moving forward? There you go.
So I guess one of the, whoops, you all right?
I'm having trouble electronically today, folks.
One of the issues which we've often come across is, you say you talk to patients and patients say, oh, well, I want to be able to turn on the tap or go and get the newspaper or whatever. And back comes the answer, well, that's just anecdote. How do you turn anecdote into evidence?
That's actually one of the things we spend a lot of time working with the FDA on. That's really kind of where the final rubber meets the road, so to speak. That's one of the reasons we came up with this registry and this registry program. So when I use the term registry, I mean longitudinal natural history study. I use the European terminology for it, but that's really what we're talking about. And the idea here is we actually captured from them, can you go to the tap? Can you walk to get the paper? How long does it take you to do? So what we try to come up with in our registry programs are relevant data that we can collect over time so that we can actually quantitate that. And as you say, anecdote is not evidence. However, anecdote can often lead to the collection of evidence. And so what we've tried to do is systematize that as best we can.
Yeah. Thank you.
Certainly.
Question over here.
Hi everyone, this is Chandra Saigal from Canada. Great presentation, thanks for that. I have 2 questions. One is there any guidance being developed to define or put in context the unmet clinical need? Because in rare diseases, sometimes, it sounds like an easy question, but it's not because it varies from case to case. And second, I think you hit it on the nail, how to define the evidence. So we are able to find some of that discussion in the FDA summaries or advisory panel summaries, but in the regulatory decision summaries or product monographs, I think it will be really helpful if there is an acknowledgement of what are the practical challenges and why was this type of evidence accepted in this scenario. I think if that can be more plain language, it will be useful for all stakeholders.
Okay, so we've got a week to answer those. Let me start with the first one with unmet clinical need. That's one of the reasons we launched the registry program. So actually the elements collected in that registry are driven by the patients themselves, but we've tried to leave enough wiggle room in there so we can catch things that we don't know about. Unmet clinical need, I have to deal with that as a practitioner on a daily basis. We have huge gaps. We have gaps in adult care for our patients. Most of my patients basically drop off the face of the world as far as things that are available for them when they hit their 20s. That's one place where we have a lot of things going on there. And some of it's a case of we're a victim of our own success. We've got extended lifespan for almost all of our patients, and now we're looking at what goes on there. Other unmet clinical needs, that's the I don't know what I don't know category, which we're trying to fill in. Some of that we can do by this. Some of it is by getting our patient organizations together and talking. What we often find is that will spark a lot of issues around things that aren't going on. The next question, that's about the best one I can do for that one. Evidence. So let me put on one of my other hats. So I chair the Rare Disease Advisory Panel for PCORI, which we struggle with what do we actually do around all the different rare diseases. One of the things we're trying to figure out is what constitutes good evidence and try to standardize that as best you can for rare disease. The problem is it ends up being a custom fit for almost every disease. So for instance, if I'm dealing with a muscular disease, is it muscle strength? How's that measured? What's the statistical model you can do? I think the one thing, though, that everyone would agree from is we're getting away from the old P equals 0.05 model. That kind of comes out of agricultural science around World War II. If you've got 5 patients, you're never going to get 0.05. I've actually worked with diseases where there are literally 2 patients in existence, and you can't do a standardized clinical trial. So people are now exploring, and the FDA is very creative about this, and we'll do early meetings looking at Bayesian strategies, looking at changing the model. So the classic model is very high level of evidence and not a whole lot going on afterwards. And I think what you're seeing now is maybe you flatten that curve a little bit, but you do a much longer follow through on the back end for rare disease. So it changes the risk model. The area of observation is kind of the same if you look at the area under the curve. It's just that the initial peak isn't as high because you just simply don't have the patients for it. So I think there's a lot of things going on. It's actually kind of an exciting time to be in the field.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh dear, I wasn't very clear.
Yeah,
Lots of questions.
Yes, Ruxandra and then gentleman there.
Thank you. So, very nice presentation. I'm Ruxandra Dargia from the European Commission. And you've mentioned some of the keywords, the collaboration,
yes.
Obviously registry, standardization. And if you're looking in particular to the ultra-rare diseases, and you've just mentioned circumstances where you may have 1 or 2 patients that are alive, can you elaborate a little bit about your international strategy and the international collaborations? Because we do collaborate very well.
Oh, I know. It's been actually terrific. So the consortium, let me give a quick case study and then just hit one quick point. So I was the principal investigator for the Urea Cycle Disorders Consortium, and we had a fabulous collaboration in the European Union to build a sister organization called EIMD. And what we did is we shared our data registries. So when you come down to it, if you can't compare the data elements between the two, you've wasted a tremendous amount of time. So we actually shared our data element design, and so we have about an 85% concordance of all the things we collect from a data standpoint. So suddenly we've doubled the information pool that we can actually look at. And the nice thing too is people do different things in different places. So suddenly we have clinical trials where one group does something one way, one group does something another way, and we can actually start to compare. So that's been very fruitful. It's been going on for about 5-6 years, and it's really been a lot of fun. The other thing, thinking about, with registries, kind of some lessons learned. Ontology is boring, but it's also critical. So ontology is what you call something. If I call something a blood pressure, well, is that recumbent, sitting, standing? Am I doing it in millimeters of mercury? How far above the ocean? How do you standardize these things? Simple things. But yet they're actually vital if you want to collect data and to be able to compare it across different studies. One of the things we've done with our NORD registry program is rather than inventing a whole new set of ontologies, is use the ones that have already been invented. There's a great group out of Berlin, Peter Robinson's group, who do a great job with ontologies, the GRDR, CDISC. And so what you have to do is map to those different systems and try to use them again and again.
Thank you. One last one before we move on.
Thank you for presentation. In fact, I could say that not for clinical trials, but if surgeon comes into OR operating some case what he sees once a year, it's rare disease. So I would like your comments on concentration of the patients into some centers, and if you know about European initiative to propose a network for and referrals for rare disease would be fine if you comment on that. Thank you.
All right. One of the things we have found is the model of center of excellence does seem to work. Cystic fibrosis provides a great example for that in the United States. We've done the same thing around a lot of the metabolic conditions as well. Experience with a condition does increase the outcome. You bring up the idea of the surgeon. So, for instance, patients with achondroplasia, different types of dwarfism, a surgeon who is not used to working with that patient can very easily crush their spinal cord just trying to intubate them. I've seen this happen. So one of the things we try to do is get patients to where folks know how to deal with that particular condition. We try to get the information out to the others because it's still going to happen. But there is, I think, a definite benefit from trying to bring together centers. I am familiar working with the metabolic community in Europe and with the SSIEM and some of the other groups around the efforts to create referral centers. And they've done a good job. The French model is quite good for rare disorders. They have designated centers where you go for care. There's expertise combined there. Outcomes are better in those centers. And I know that that's a spreading model as well. I say it's good. I say actually centers of expertise, if you have something incredibly complex and you've only seen one in your career and you don't have someone there to hold your hand who's seen a couple of others, it's not good. Now, what I will make a comment, though, is that's not always feasible. You can't always move a patient from A to B because they're not stable enough. One of the ways we're trying to leverage that is actually using technology. So we do a lot of telemedicine management of patients. Someone with a skilled set of hands, an intelligent physician who may not be familiar with the disease can benefit greatly from having close communication with a degree of expertise. My program here in Children's National, we actually managed the biochemical program for the state of Mississippi for the last year by telemedicine. The outcome, even though there was no biochemical geneticist there. So you can do that. It's a model, and it's a model we probably have to look at with some of the workforce issues we have.
Thank you very much, Marshall. We'll move straight on now to Pat Furlong from Parent Project and Muscular Dystrophy. Pat.
Yeah. I'm good. How are you? I'm doing fine. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I'm assuming the right one moves forward, right? It's pretty straightforward. Good. Not so good with technology. Well, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm going to give you the experience of Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, which is an organization I started. The reason I started PPMD, we shorten it because it's a mouthful, is because my sons were diagnosed with muscular dystrophy at that time. The predicted outcome was exactly what happened. They missed their motor milestones. Although they started walking, they peaked. So their mean age of life in terms of their ability to function was 8 years old. They then lost the ability to ambulate, lost the ability to move their arms, and died at 15 and 17. Medicine didn't apply regular tools, so they didn't recognize that they were in heart failure. They didn't really think about the fact that maybe supporting ventilation might give them a few extra days. So it's a new day, and I'm really happy to be in this new day of Duchenne, and happier still for what lies in the future. So Duchenne muscular dystrophy is an X-linked pediatric disease. It is rare. About 14,000, 12,000 patients in the United States and 250,000 worldwide. The incidence is 1 in 4,600 little boys will be born with Duchenne, but also there's a 30% spontaneous mutation rate. So 1 in 4,600 women will be born as spontaneous carriers, totally unknown, as they enter their reproductive years. I am a spontaneous carrier, my mother is not. Diagnosis is between still 3 and 5 years old, and no matter what we do, we can't seem to make a mark on that 3 to 5 years old for diagnosis, mainly because weakness in muscle is very difficult for many patients to see and for many young or for many physicians to see. Causes a progressive loss of function, isn't 100% lethal. So I started PPMD with the idea that we could do something, that patients were important, and that's probably from the fact that I am a nurse with a master's degree in med-surg nursing. I ran the medical intensive care unit at Ohio State University, surgical and then transplant units. I was really sort of let's say disappointed when the first day that I went up to that unit to take over its leadership, I saw on the door that patients and their family members were allowed visitation 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon. And so I asked for the statistics, and they said usually 75% of the people will die. It didn't make any sense to me that patients' families were not allowed to be with the people they cared about during their last days on this earth. So I rapidly removed the sign. That was my first sort of violent gesture, and opened the doors of that ICU. Most of the time, clinicians said those family members would be in the way. And I heard that again this morning when someone called me and said they were going to the FDA, and the clinicians were going, and the biostatisticians were going, the ethicists were going. And I said, "Are you taking patients?" And she said, "No, I think they'd be in the way." I said, "Then I'm not sure they want that therapy that you're trying to work on." So we started PPMD, and the first thing we did was wanted to know about these patients. What do they look like? Are they the same or different? What's common about them? What can we learn? So we started a registry. This follows the common data elements of the NIH. Today it's a robust registry of about 5,000 patients. We also have their genetic data and their medical testing, which is uploaded into the system. 3 genetic counselors manage the registry, and we are able to upload in real time. We are one of PROCORI's patient-powered research networks, and soon we will be, with the patient's consent, reaching into their electronic medical records and incorporating that into the data. So this will be a robust system and a robust registry, and it's one that we have registered patients for clinics and recruited for trials inside of 2 months. So we then, as Duchenne became a well-characterized disease and companies became interested, we thought we might need to talk to the FDA about unmet need. So we did that, and we visited with the FDA on a number of times, and I'm going to describe those. We also began a process to certify centers. I think the most important thing for patients is exactly what Marshall just said, and some of the questions around that. Patients have to have the confidence that they're seeing a physician who knows something about their disease and knows what to do about that. Because often as parents, we come into the physician's office and we get a comment like, "You'll know a lot more about this than I do." So then that just is a U-turn to get right out of that office and find another physician. We also integrate with companies. We have developed the Duchenne Development Roundtable, and this is for all 28 now companies involved in this space to get together and talk about what's important to them in the pre-competitive space and what we can do to help fill in the gaps. So I think advocacy plays a vital role to set a research agenda, to develop a meaningful study in terms of benefit risk, and to weigh in on the interpretation of the results, and then to be able to disseminate those results to the people who need to see them. So we had been watching the legislation PDUFA 5 and in meeting with the FDA in between there. And at that time, and most of you from the United States will remember that 20 conditions were identified where the FDA would listen to the patient voice. We weren't one of those 20, so we decided we thought about how could we get our foot in the door for the FDA to listen to our voice. So we decided to begin our own preference work and be managing and measuring our own preference data. We wanted to improve the benefit risk framework that was being developed, and we wanted to understand our patients. And we knew that stories and anecdotal stories were not going to make a big difference to the FDA, but they wanted data. So we did exactly that. So we anticipated the legislation. We wanted to inform the FDA about this. We developed a pilot research plan with Johns Hopkins University social scientists and health economists, and we wanted this to be a community-led effort. So we developed a whole strategy around this, and we applied this then in a patient, in this case, in a caregiver risk benefit. So what we learned in this, because I know Ulster is going to probably start tasering me in a few minutes, is we developed a list of worries. We used best worst scaling, and we then issued our first report, and now 3 publications later on caregiver preferences in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Now, this is the preliminary results. 119 parents completed the survey. You can see 80 of them were biological, 109 Caucasian, 107 married, and their highest priority is to slow disease progression. That's the highest priority. That was a higher priority than giving more years of life. So slowing disease progression. It kind of relates back to when my sons were diagnosed and I borrowed a lot of money, $100,000, and went around trying to find how to save 5 minutes. So slowing disease progression. We also felt that patient testimony was really important. I think we can call all of this anecdotal reports, and maybe the FDA is not interested, but I think the stories are powerful, and I think this one clearly defines what these patients feel with Duchenne. I understand the need for caution and care, but I also know that our children are dying. Parents should be able to decide the risk-benefit of a drug that has gone through and passed preliminary testing. I'd rather my son die trying and fighting than waiting and wondering and wishing. I am one parent willing to take on an educated benefit-risk framework. So I think this is important, and we, inside of this very short 6-month study, collected 178 stories, which we presented to the FDA as well, to bolster the slowing disease progression as the highest priority. We think this is a highly collaborative process. We think that it's really important because a large number of people can participate rather than the small number of people that can show up at FDA meetings or come here to Washington, D.C., or be very vocal on Facebook. It is resource and time intensive, and we knew going in that we may well not get the answer that we suspected we would. Although, I must say, slowing disease progression was in my head, and I was pretty sure that's what we would get. So we then decided, in addition to raising our voice and not being one of the 20 diseases, we wanted to really make sure that the FDA heard our voice even louder. So we organized a policy forum. The policy forum was held in December of 2013. And this was to really engage with the FDA. 21 members of the FDA came to the policy forum. We enabled this by looking at 4 distinct areas. 1 is the unmet need, 2 is natural history, 3 is dystrophin, which is the missing protein here, and that has its complexities about how you measure and what that means and how you can interpret it, and then extrapolation, because we wanted to make sure that as drugs were evaluated, and perhaps in a very narrow target population, that all people who were eligible to take that drug in that disease indication would have access. We then developed guidance. There are 28 companies involved in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and we wanted a common language across those companies. We all wanted to have that playbook so those companies would know what to do. So we went to the FDA and actually asked them to write guidance. They said they didn't do such a thing for rare diseases because there's 7,300 and growing, and ask us to write guidance. And so we were the first patient population to write draft guidance. We started the day after that policy forum occurred, and 6 months later submitted guidance to the open docket of the FDA. That was received very well. I think they were a bit overwhelmed at a 45-page well-referenced document. I think they didn't anticipate what they would receive, and they were a bit overwhelmed, but they posted it for public comment. And on the dystrophin quantification and analysis, which is incredibly complex, once they saw all of the arguments which we laid out in the guidance, they held in February of the following year a meeting on dystrophin to understand what methodologies are used to quantify dystrophin and how or if we could interpret it. A few months after that, the FDA issued guidance on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I'm happy to say that they turned around, used our document as a base, and then issued guidance, which we were all terribly thrilled about. They called us in and said it's shorter. It's not quite as detailed as yours, but I think the 2 documents will stand as a standard for the field in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and we're really thrilled. And I must say to you that we've just recently given them another work on cardiac outcomes. We had a meeting with HLBI, Heart, Lung, and Blood, to talk about heart failure in Duchenne and what we might do and what we might measure and how we might understand that, and then provided a report to the FDA. And they've been very cooperative and very willing to receive our reports. So then we decided to ask ourselves, if we look outside of muscle, are there important preferences of patients in other areas that are not related to function, muscle function. So this was supported by Santhera. Santhera is a company that's working on a drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. They didn't have any influence in the design or the execution of the study or in the analysis of the study. So we wanted to understand to what extent do patients and parents assess the pulmonary outcomes associated with meaningful benefit. To that end, we did the same sort of framework with a review committee, and we outlined the list of worries and the list of benefits. We had a leadership committee that would design the study, a stakeholder committee that would evaluate whether that makes sense or not, and a review committee to do some cognitive interviewing afterward. We used, again, best-worst scaling because that seems to work very well in rare diseases, and we used that scaling one more time. We listed the order of non-skeletal muscle targets here, and the outcome of this is the highest priority is coughing. And in the cognitive interviews about coughing, it's really important to understand that yes, coughing is important to remove secretions, yes, to decrease infection risk, yes, to decrease hospitalizations, but perhaps one of the more important reasons is so that these patients during the night, if they cannot cough up secretions, they can't call for help. So coughing was a highest priority in this study, and this study was again provided to the FDA. So now our next steps is complete analysis and publication. As you might understand, we're involved in benefit risk phase 2, and that is the FDA has asked us not only to look at a greater number of parents and caregivers and patients, but they've asked us to look across the trajectory of the illness to see if the benefit risk equation changes over time with loss of function and what that means. So we're heavily involved in benefit risk phase 2. You have to think about where patients are these days. And there are days when I don't think I'd ever say out loud, I'm glad my sons aren't here, but I guess I'm never that. But I'm glad that I'm not put in this corner. Families right now believe that they have one shot on goal, just one opportunity to participate in a clinical trial. The clinical trials are 48 weeks. There's sometimes an extension phase and then analysis. It's 3 years or more of a patient's life. There are very narrow protocols here. We're talking about a 6-minute walk test, 300 to 400 meters is the inclusion criteria. We're talking about forced air climb, 7 to 10 seconds off the floor, and often a specific mutation. I can't even imagine living with that. And parents are in the corner to pick the best trial. I know it's an experiment, but in their head, the best trial with the greatest possible outcome to slow disease progression for their son. This is about benefit risk, but it is a horrible position to be in and a very difficult one. So we have to find ways to accelerate the delivery of good clinical trials that get at whether this drug works or not, whether it's safe or not, and understand that it's going to take way beyond 48 weeks for us to understand the full impact. We then have gone on, and we're spending about $1 million, which makes me shudder every time I say it out loud. But we formed an alliance with the Critical Path Institute, and we're now working with them because the idea here, as you've heard this morning, our project is called De-Risk, and this is to look at and assess all sorts of data elements so that we can understand the natural history and create a disease algorithm so that we can have clinical trials with outcomes that are meaningful to patients and at the same time are inclusive of patients within this population. So this is what we hope to do, and this is what we're working on. We've initiated this for about 6 months. I am hearing all the time it's going to take 2 or 3 years, and I'm wishing it would take yesterday, but at the same time we think this is really, really an important step for our organization, and our next step will be combination therapies before approvals. Just putting it out there. Thank you.
Pat, one of the survey you put up showed that I think that 92% of your respondents were of Caucasian origin.
Yes.
I mean, how can you? I mean, America's a very multicultural society as we are in Britain. How do you reach out into the other ethnic communities?
So I think this is a difficult situation for all rare diseases because the social networking is a lot of people, and I won't say that they are all Caucasian, but we hear these very loud voices. So in our 10 certified centers now, we're reaching out and going out one by one into those centers and providing some support in the centers for them to interview patients who come in and encourage them to participate in Duchenne Connect, which is our registry, and encourage them participating in our benefit risk studies. So that is our next phase 2, is we want to make sure that we have a diverse voice.
Thank you. Questions from, yes, there, Richard.
Thanks for that. That's a very inspirational story. We've worked with your counterparts in the UK, and I've heard many of these points made over there. If you look across the different things you're interested in, one would be trial design, another would be the nature of the benefit sought, and then another would be how benefit risk should be determined, another would be the length of trial design. So are you getting movement on all of those fronts, or is there stickiness either amongst companies or amongst regulators on points of substance?
We're getting movement on all fronts. Maybe different companies are moving on different fronts more rapidly, but we're getting movement on all fronts.
One here, and then we'll move on to Anders.
Nigel Cook, Novartis. There's ways, obviously, to identify what's meaningful to a patient and then to build that into your clinical trial design. There are also very effective ways now to quantitatively measure patient preference so that you can build patient preference modeling and show the trade-off between different parameters, and also risk-benefit analysis. Now, assuming that's done appropriately from a pharma company's perspective, working together with the patient organizations to do it in an appropriate way, do you consider that an appropriate way forward? And most importantly, the regulators, the payers, the HTAs in the room, are they willing to take that on board when they're making their decisions?
Well, I can't say for sure because we don't have any decisions that have been made, but I can say that that is our framework moving forward. We are including industry patients in this discussion, and we are including payers. But I don't have any evidence to show you. We have an AdCom coming up with one particular drug on the 24th of November and another one on January 22nd. So I'm hopeful to report back to you that, in fact, we were able to make the case for both of these drugs to be approved.
Thank you very much, Pat. And now, Anders, if you...
Thank you. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you very much for inviting me here and coming over the pond from Europe to America and to talk about these important issues here. Our organization, European Patient Forum, is now in 12 years old, unites EU patient organization to ensure a strong and influential voice in the EU health and society policy. Collaboration is our leitmotif. It is rare that one single player in healthcare system can ensure better health outcomes in isolation. But we say it so often, cynics might suggest that it has come rather a cliché. In reality, it's more important now than ever. In a climate where we are striving to ensure a balance between real innovation and solidarity, ensuring access and equity to high quality but sustainable health and social care models, and many societies and citizens are still weathering the impact of economic crisis. We believe that patients are not simply a problem to fix, but can really be part of a collective solution towards better health outcomes and ultimately a better society for all. Key to this is patient empowerment, and we launched our campaign on patient empowerment in May this year, together with health professionals, academias, policymakers, industry and patient leaders who all helped to shape the campaign. Entitled Patient Prescribe. Patient Prescribe. It provides the concepts, the tools, the evidence, and the energy to ensure that patient empowerment is embedded as a key strategy towards sustainable health system. It has three tenets. First, quality information to patient and health literacy. Second, a new dialogue between patients and their trusted health professional. And thirdly, self-management. The uptake of the campaign by health professionals and their societies, by policymakers and key thought leaders bodes well. Our goal is to have a European strategy on patient empowerment to move forward on this approach in a coherent, measurable, and effective way. Linked to patient empowerment is, of course, patient engagement, alongside other stakeholders in the innovation process, regardless of what that innovation is. Systems innovation, social innovation, technological innovation, or therapeutic innovation. EPF is working collaboratively with many other stakeholders in driving this forward. Perhaps the best example of this is EUPATI, the European Patient Academy on Therapeutic Innovation. It is an unprecedented partnership between patients, science, and industry to ensure that patients have skills and knowledge about medicine's development that complements their own unique experiential knowledge as patients. Funded by the Innovative Medicine Initiative, EUPATI is providing state-of-the-art objective information and resources on the therapeutic innovation process in 7 key EU languages and in 12 countries, reaching at least 100,000 individuals before the end of the project. A certificate-level training course will mean that within a year we will have 100 patient experts ready to engage in the therapeutic innovation chain, from identifying research priorities to involvement in collection or of real-world evidence, as we will be discussing tomorrow. As we approach the final year of EUPATI, we are actually acutely aware that the Patient Academy is not an experiment or indeed a nice-to-do thing. We have a proof of concept, but the continuity of this program is essential to ensure that we have sufficient patient advocates who are able to bring forward their own expertise of the patient journey in the right context to generate real change for the benefit of patients and support the development of valuable innovation. Patient access is another key pillar of our work. We strongly believe in cooperation between stakeholders to improve patient access to healthcare. This is why, together with the National Patient Organization in Bulgaria, we co-founded the Patient Access Partnership. The partnership is a patient-led network that enables different health stakeholders to join forces to develop, to drive, and propose to the European Commission and European member states sustainable solutions to ensure equitable patient access to quality healthcare in the European Union. Stakeholders including industry, academia, and healthcare professionals are actively participating in delivering these solutions and ensuring that access remains high on the political agenda. Another key example of cooperation to advance on universal access to healthcare is a Riga roadmap, an action plan to create sustainable, equitable, and participatory. It's an Italian word, isn't it? Participatory European health system, you wake up, that improve patient outcomes, which is supported by the public health community through EFPA, industry, and EPF. We have made strong political recommendations on equal treatment in healthcare in our position paper for healthcare for all, published in 2014. In 2014, we joined forces with 10 organizations to raise awareness on discrimination in healthcare on the occasion of the new Health Commissioners' hearing in European Parliament. In 2015, we have supported with various NGOs, including Doctors of the World and Platform for Collaboration with Undocumented Migrants, and EFPA, a common letter alerting health ministers on migrants' health and ask them to challenge EU and national policies on migration which undermine public health objectives, and use the tools available at European level to drive developments towards universal access to healthcare in the member states of the European Union. We believe that industry has a key role to play in improving patient outcomes and ensuring better, faster, and safer access. One example, among others, is our collaboration with the MedTech Europe, the association representing the medical devices industry. We have a memorandum of understanding, and we have established a dialogue between patient and industry representatives. Together, we have reflected on key themes like patient-centered healthcare and how to ensure health technology assessment is fit for purpose and really involves patients. The dialogue has delivered a checklist on pillars for patient-centered outcome and companies, which we believe, if implemented, would greatly help in ensuring innovation corresponded to patient need in this arena. Similarly, for over 10 years now, we have been part of the FBI patient think tank in order to have a place where patient leaders and company representatives can debate and discuss topics of common interest. And it's very clear that we will not always agree. Our perspectives are very different, and should be, but enhancing understanding and mutual knowledge has shown enormous values. We are living in as we heard today, in a very different times to 2010, 5 years ago. The patient role, expectation, and responsibility at both individual and at collective levels have transformed dramatically, as have advanced in medicine research and knowledge. A new consciousness, a new literacy among all the players around the table is key to managing this, with the right tools to ensure a supportive and enabling environment. This will foster not only collaboration, but real trust, valuing our tradition and heritage, but embracing a different mindset that also values patient empowerment and the patient's truly unique experiential knowledge, which can be enriched through true knowledge about the medicine's life cycle and competence to really engage as equal partners. We heard it before today, and I will mostly underline it. We are facing a new shift of paradigm, and that needs to be seen in action as well. Thank you very much.
Right, Anders, Upati, 100 expert patients across Europe, is this enough?
Absolutely. For Bulgaria. No.
So how are you going to scale up?
We're going to scale up. That's part of the deal. The deal is we understood that we have to deliver patient representatives who knows the patient journey, who is a true representative, not an intellectual representative, but a true one, who has the blood and the feeling in there and the patient journey. But they need to also be skilled, they need to have the knowledge and the language we heard and so forth. So we started this journey with Upati, with the Patient Academy. And so the 100 was the number first. Then we are now moving on. But then we're facing difficulties in the sustainable deliveries of this. So that is the discussion we are having now with IMI. Hello, Pierre. And the European Commission. Hello, Rox. And the industry wasn't here today, and FBI, but we will take them as well.
Thank you. Questions for Anders? In that case, perhaps I could ask our speakers to come and take their seats on these elevated chairs here.
Can we direct the movie now?
I think, yeah. Actually, what we will do is we will bring the bar out and put a pint of beer in front of each of you. So
Okay, well, that's
love that.
I should say that Alison over there is tweeting furiously the content of today. So please make sure that any questions or comments are couched in 140 characters or fewer, because it will make her life much easier. Right, we've now got about 20 minutes to pick the bones out of what has been, I think, a fascinating range of presentations, which has covered a wide range of ground. Just to tie it in with the first session, Hans-Georg, you tellingly made the point that the drug that comes on the day of my funeral is not much use to me. But for patients with complex diseases, with progressive conditions, there are loads of little deaths along the way that can take things away. I mean, how can we, as it were, bring that recognition of urgency, of the need to move forward, further up the agenda? Go on, Marshall, you start.
I'll take a stab. One of the places actually having patients involved in the process. Because I think when we reduce this to a sort of a dry scientific regulatory environment, we want binary solutions to equations. We want something that's neat and orderly that fits within, a easily predictable pathway that we can quantitate. And life just doesn't work that way. Patients have ups and downs, and no two patients are the same, at least never in my experience. And the things that happen to the families really should have more of an impact. So I think bringing them into the process at an earlier stage in the development and design, I think can help sort of change that.
Yeah, Anders.
Of course I agree, but also that events like this are very important, because now this multitasking and multi-knowledge in the room, it's important to focus and to give that information. But then it's up to us from the patient organization and patient society to show, because if we show, and if you come with your daughter, no, son, sorry, and that shows it, then it's flesh and blood, and then it's creating a reality, and then I think showing that to the room and the various stakeholders, then it pushes. But it's very much up to the patient organization, I would say, as well, to shout and scream.
Well, I think patients are there from the beginning, right? Especially in rare diseases, because very frequently when you're diagnosed with a rare disease, your next step is to find out who's the best doctor and who's looking at this disease, who cares about it. And very often you'll find an academic, depending on how rare the disease is or how well known it is, or perhaps how interesting it might be. So this academic is struggling often in rare disease without finances to complete his work or her work. So often the patient or family or advocacy organization provides that support. So they are exposed to what happens in the mouse, or what mouse model they're using, or what dog model. So we learn the whole zoo, if you will, of testing a particular idea or target and validating that target. And I think advocacy organizations, and certainly patients, pave the way. Often when industry comes in, then sort of a door goes down, because what are you going to do with them anyway, right? They're just the patients. But I think it's really important to understand is patients need to be involved. They are from the beginning based on a diagnosis. They're going to be in the end, because they're going to have to take this particular drug, navigate an insurance system that may not be simple, and in the US at least pay something for it likely. So they're here, they're at the beginning and the end, so they deserve to be throughout this process. They deserve to understand what the target is, what you have to do to get from A to B, what you are trying to learn, what question you're asking in a phase 1, in a phase 2, in a phase 3. What is the process? What are the barriers? They need to be involved in the protocol. Patient-reported outcomes are important. For instance, in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, when we looked at that non-muscle targets, some of the parents said turning over in bed was important. It clearly wasn't in the patient preferences, but it might be to the parents, because if you're up all night turning a boy from left to right and making him comfortable, then you might have been up all night. And I can imagine looking across the breakfast table, you're not really happy. And the day goes badly. You're tired, work doesn't go well, school. So I think patients need and deserve to be at the forefront throughout the development paradigm. Otherwise, I think that the industry is at real risk to fail.
John, and then I'm going to go to Hans-Georg, and then...
As I heard yesterday, I hear every time patients, pain in the ass, and you never know what they're doing and whatever. But yesterday I was at the cocktail, and then I hear Bettina Rees saying one thing, and it was actually enlightening, like bang, yes, true. Don't forget, a burden of disease or a disease is actually not stopping at what level of education. So she was saying like, well, we are looking for patients. We find them on the internet. That's what we do with Dipper as well. And these are English-speaking people that are obviously already have a certain academic degree, because otherwise they couldn't do an eloquent talk on English. So wherever it comes from, patients are educated. So you find in every patient environment, you see academics getting patients, and then just say patients are just, let's do it like that. That's absolutely rubbish. So we should actually get patients involved, and don't stop like patients at the one, well, I was a physician, and then at once I became patient, and at once they didn't talk with me, but about me. So things like that are happening if you become patient, and we should really start taking the patient seriously. He's at an equal level as long as you find the right literacy patient. Of course, we have bad habits, but...
Going to bring Hans-Georg in here, and then I'll go to Anders and Marshall.
About this urgency thing, Hans-Georg Eichler, EMA. I heard many of you saying there is a sense of urgency. We may have a different view of what level of risk we accept and all that. Understood. Now, therefore, you come to us, the regulators, and tell us what you want and what your views are. Fine. So we try to respond with things like, whether you call it breakthrough or adaptive pathways or all of this, doesn't matter. We try to hear you and to listen to you. The moment we do this, we get blasted by NGOs who are healthy people who are telling us they are protecting you against us.
Yes.
So, are you in a dialogue with those people?
Yes. I'm having this fight day after day after day with the so-called blunt idiots that are taking my, telling about my health, and now they are taking care about my position. And I want to shoot them. It's actually a little bit why I'm against patient advocates organizations that are ruled by academics. Because the best knowledge of the burden of disease is with the patient, and he should fight against all those things. And the media, because they are the most, they are not here, so they are actually the ones that make the mistakes, because they're not here. We all make the mistakes. They are actually putting people in front of a camera that are not having this experience, and they are talking about how we should be protected. But that's a little bit the bias in the whole system. We're asking the wrong people, and we should ask the real patients, not patient advocates or patients that are only representing one person, their personal opinion. We should actually ask those people, how many people do you represent? Because the moment that you know that, how many people do you really represent of the whole population? You have the right to talk, and everything you say, that's very nice, but it's an individual thing. But no one is getting to that point. And yes, we should work harder on that one ourselves.
Anders or Marshall?
I was just thinking that I said that it's up to us, patient organization, also to push for urgency and push for development. But the structure must also be open. So then I'm very happy when I listen to Hans-Georg and the change of EMA is doing. It is little like what the industry did years ago when they said that now we have thrown out Taylorism within the system and bring in lean production. What you said is that the EMA is thrown out the old-fashioned way of working. So that is great. And we need that from the Commission, we need that from IMI, we need that from all stakeholders and also from industry, that the structure must also be open and embracing us when we are coming and pushing for this. So that's why events like this are important.
Marshall.
I'm going to agree with what was said, but also, too, it's the same thing at FDA. We yell, push, 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 faster, faster, faster. The second something goes wrong, who gets thrown under the bus first? It's the FDA regulator. That's why I think it's probably one of the worst jobs to have. We have to stand beside on this. We have to assume that risk. And as you know, society's evolved into a very risk-averse. If something bad goes wrong, there needs to be someone to blame. And unfortunately, with a lot of these diseases and conditions, bad things happen, no matter what you do. And sometimes you may make them worse without meaning to, just by trying to fix them and do them better. And if we don't accept the responsibility for that as a societal level, we're not going to really move anything forward. Otherwise, we're asking you to take a risk that we're not willing to support you in. And that's not right. You just can't do that. The other thing I was going to say, just real quick, is from the physician standpoint, too, the rare disease field is kind of unique. I have to go to at least 2 or 3 meetings a year with the family organizations because we have our meetings together between our scientific groups. And those folks are in my face saying, okay, you said you were working on this last year. Have you got the data from that experience? I mean, they actually know what we're doing at the bench, and they're saying, okay, is your new tech got the machine working so you can actually get this done now? There's a level of accountability and that degree of interaction I think may be missing from other areas of medicine and research. So it's a definite partnership. It's a little bit intense sometimes, but I think it's definitely a productive partnership.
Thank you. Yes, gentleman here. 140 characters, remember.
As panel, and probably I will be not popular in this panel in particular, you should admit that you are lobbying organization. Patients' organizations are acting as a typical lobby. On the other side, in the societies, in the state, in the hands of the who are distributing money is a certain sum of money. So if we will spend a lot of one side, let's say rare diseases, we will not be able to fund those very simple things, dying from appendicitis, bleeding, ulcer bleeding, or something else. How you feel about this? Are you correct? Is everything there good?
Since I benefit from some of that funding, let me make 2 points. First is rare diseases teach us more about common diseases than anything else. First genes mapped in Alzheimer's disease were mapped because of the study of Down syndrome. When you look at infectious diseases, you can even make the points there. Yes, the pie has a certain finite quality to it. It does. And I can't do equal funding for all 7,300 rare diseases from that. But as a group, it's a huge group. And inevitably, it's always one of those things that we always learn something that we're able to carry back home. From treating rare urea cycle disorders with hyperammonemia, we've learned things about hepatic encephalopathy that could help out the 4 million folks with chronic liver disease. So it's always a trade-off.
Yeah. Quickly, Pat.
Sure, and I think you're right. We do lobby. We do for more funding. But in general, at least in the U.S., you can't do disease-specific lobbying because it won't work. So, and we know the applicability of broad funding. So we're always lobbying to support NIH, lobbying to support the Department of Defense. And I think also you have to recognize it's not all rare diseases. Duchenne, at least in my experience of Duchenne, it's been around a very long time, but it's taken 20 years to get to this point in Duchenne. So I think that also is drawing all boats in terms of neuromuscular disease. Every single one of the 9 neuromuscular diseases are already making progress, are already having biorepositories and registries and moving forward into trials with industry involvement. So I think it is utilizing the ones that are moving the fastest, that we can understand, perhaps that we have the most understanding of now, and trying to pull all rare diseases. I share with Marshall a real responsibility for rare diseases, and so the models we create, benefit risk, our certification process, it's all widely shared.
Yeah, I'm going to. A couple of people are keen to ask questions, so if we could just quickly move on. We'll take you were next in line, and then we'll take Ruxandra as the final question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Stella Blackburn from Quintiles. I'm an ex-regulator, a pharmacoepidemiologist, and most importantly, a patient. I know how important it is to listen to the patient's voice. I want to listen to the patient's voice. But which voice should I be listening to? Because even with rare diseases, you may find at least 6 or 7 different organizations all claiming to be the patient's voice for that disease. How can we bring the various voices together so that we're actually listening to the patient's voice?
You cannot.
Anders, you...
Yes and no. Yes and no. We have that discussion in Europe at the moment to what characterize a patient rep. What should you fulfill in order to have the right to say that I represented patients? And that discussion is going on in Europe at the moment, because there are different organizations that claim that they are patient organizations, but maybe they are not particular. So that discussion is going on. So you're right in that. When it comes to Europe, European Patient Forum was formed for that purpose. Then the European Commission invited all the umbrellas in Europe to create the umbrellas of the umbrellas. So Eurodis, rare disease, is one of the members of EPF. So we are becoming in that, we are a political party. We don't defend one particular disease. We are fighting for that the disease-specific organization should have room. Coming back to the funding, I think we patient organizations, we will never accept to be put against each other. We are fighting together in all this when it comes to funding, rare or not rare, what it is. But in the new time we are seeing, the new paradigm we are shifting now, we also need to look into the funding of NGOs like patient organization. How should that look like? That kind of discussion is not going on particularly well, and I think we need to speed up that so that the strongest lobbyists shouldn't be just for one disease. There also need to be other variables in this.
Thank you, yeah. Ruxandra.
So I think that every one of you in the panel, Hans-Georg, the colleague that just asked the question, talked about the communication. I think that all of us are doing a great deal to integrate the point of view of the patients. We are the patients, or we will be the patients, or we are the parents of patients. So we are all very much involved. But I think that we have not succeeded in our communication strategies. From your point of view, what should we do more, both on your side as patient representatives and then our side? I'm from the Commission, probably other colleagues are here from what would be a governmental organization, not the NGOs.
Marshall, do you want?
I have one thing that I've observed in the States, and I don't know the extent of this in Europe. We have a lot of regulations trying to make sure that no one is conflicted in their position with something else. Unfortunately, that also tends to shut down communication. So, for instance, I was asked recently to sit on an FDA panel. There were 48 forms to fill out, and I actually then could no longer have communication with a patient organization that I was working with, and I couldn't do this and that and that. And I was laughing with the person who had asked me because she knew that this was what was going to happen with that. And I think we need to seriously look at some of the regulations we put in place, and I think, you know, sunshine is the best answer for these things. Sunshine is definitely the best answer, but we need to make sure that we haven't straitjacketed ourselves in our communications.
John, you?
Yeah, we should look much more to other ecosystems that are doing a much better job. And if I look into social media, we started 1 year ago, looking how to make this better, because we are not reaching out. We only have 2 to 8% from all patients in patient organizations, and all the other people are not connected. So this is where we as a DIPA started to take up the bridge by just going by the member states and bring there, like North, bring that to the table at this patient organization that were in need for a certain thing, and then have a deliverable, a very clear deliverable also for the pharma industry, that you say like, well, they need this patient, how to bring that. And we started to work on that. But we learned from Google, we learned from Facebook. But that was not yet new media that were in place. So this is work in progress, and we're doing things. And no, I'm not lobbying. I'm just taking the best practice to the table and start working. That's what we do. We say, POSI, we are start working. We are coming on this kind of panels. I never ask for any money because our stakeholders have the money. We just want to make sure that things are getting to work. We did the research, we did the innovation, now it's time for the implementation, and that's where we are working on.
Pat, very quickly.
So two things. One is about communication. I think that we've established a very good relationship with the FDA, and we have this bi-directional communication, because even as we do benefit risk, we want to know, is this meaningful to you? Is this what you're looking for? Does this make sense? Have we done it wrong? Should we ask different questions? So I think this is a bi-directional communication that has to happen. With regard to Duchenne muscular dystrophy in the United States, there are 46 foundations. They have different expertise, different abilities, different interests, different targets in terms of what they're interested in or not. But I think in the rare disease community, at least in Duchenne, if it matters, we're all together. We developed guidance together, 170 people. We're in our community advisory board representing all 46 foundations. We did benefit risk, all of them joined in. So when it matters, when it's carefully explained that this is important and this will drive the field forward, we can come together. We're still going to have diverse interests about what we think could or should be done or how we make money. But at the end of the day, we all have the same view, is that we'd like the quality of life changed for the people we care about.
Yeah, thanks. Anders, very quickly.
I'm good with the communication on the level we are now, but I want to move up in the food chain. In Europe, I would like to have direct contact with the council. I've said it before, but we are not allowed into the council. The council is a member state's government. We need to move up in the ladder. When it comes to the pharma company, we need to embrace your board of directors. We need to move up. But at the level we have now, I think the EMA and the European Commission is great. But up the food chain.
Yeah, Good. Well, thank you. I'm, as you will have gathered, a Brit, and we have a royal family who have very little power at all. But representing on the panel, we have some of the royal family from patient organisations. Now, I'm going to ask them if they were king or queen for a day, and there was one thing, one piece of low-hanging fruit that you could pick that would really make a change, that would improve the health outcomes for patients with complex, life-limiting diseases, what would you do? Anders.
Starting with the king. I think that that's not an easy, the lowest hanging fruit is the shift of the paradigm again. It's so serious. It's so important that we put energy and task into that. So if I would be king of the day, I would call in all the stakeholders who are doing and having this power to do this change of the paradigm. And to change, we need to change the culture, the proceedings, the settings, the organization, the funding, and for that we need to change and exchange the understanding. But we are in that position now. We have talked enough about that patient has to be in there, must be in there, blah, 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 blah. We have to move it on to action now, and that is the shift of paradigm. That is what I would do as a king, and after that I would resign.
Abdicate, I think, is the technical term.
I'm a paid king, so that I resign.
I'll settle for a minor earldom or something like that. If I had my magic wand and I could wave it and do something specific, so I'll actually try to be specific here. I would actually change U.S. regulations around informed consent so that once an informed consent document is done for a study, it's good at all the institutions that could potentially use it. So that we're not, I lose more junior faculty to that in frustration and getting out people who could contribute and move research forward. We don't get access to patients because we can't go to every institution and do informed consent documents there. So it's a technical fix, but one that I think could have some fairly wide range.
Thank you. John.
I'm in your kingdom. But good. On that one day, everyone will have access so that we have knowledge management, so that there is interoperability, and we actually know where the best practice is. Because right now it is there, but we don't know it. So if we can get those information, those knowledge at every place, that it would actually make a lot of people stay alive and not die because we didn't know it.
Yeah. Your Majesty.
Oh, gee. Wow, I have to tell my husband. So I've joined their circle. I think also we need to, in addition to cleaning up the informed consent and making it more rational and more usable, I think we need central IRBs. I think we need centralized contract negotiation. I think we need to have then the ability to understand that this is a benefit-risk equation on the part of each family in the presence of their clinician and whatever approved options they have to choose from. And I'd also like the FDA to sort of raise the curtain and tell us how you make decisions, what was incorporated into the decision-making process. Did you have benefit risk? How did you weigh it? Did you have patient-reported outcomes? How did you look at it? What was the comprehensive data set to include all those factors that made you make a decision, yes or no, so that patients have that understanding about what was finally approved or not, and why?
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you for participating in this conversation. Yes, lunch is available at the back.